rate them.
That's right. In a criminal case, a jury cannot draw inferences of guilt from someone asserting their Fifth Amendment right. But in a civil case, a jury can draw an adverse inference, and there's a lower standard of proof. It's a preponderance of the evidence. And in a civil case, though, what Trump is facing are potential financial penalties. We've seen this already when New York dissolved his charitable foundation, which he was misusing funds, and sent his kids to remedial training on how to be fiduciaries. But, he doesn't like losing money, but I suspect that he's more willing to lose money than go to jail. And I think that that's why he made the choice that he did today.
Yeah, and Michael, more broadly, this is someone who is known as a talker, who's loud, voluble, always wants to tell his own story, does that in his various forms, people know. In two very real ways this week, he has gone quiet. He doesn't want to talk under oath, which is a tell. As I say, it is his right, but it is a tell. He doesn't want to release the search warrant, which just would tell people more about what really went down on Monday. And by the way, I'm a reporter. You show me something wrong with the search that's evidence, I'll report it. Right. But he seems to be going pretty quiet, Michael.
He is, and I suspect that's his recognition and realization, to Asha's point, that there are a lot of lanes that lead to where he is centered. It is not just New York. It's Georgia. It is not just the feds. It's January 6th. And so anytime he opens his mouth at this point, particularly with the revelations that of this search, which we now know, was about documents, 15 or 12 additional boxes that they got. If I'm Donald Trump for the first time in a long time, I shut my mouth because I don't know exactly who's standing in or driving in any of those lanes who could pick up what I'm saying and use it against me. So that's not surprising. So that leads to the next layer. And the next layer is what we see playing out on Fox News, what we see playing out on Capitol Hill, what we see playing out in the conservative media, where his minions speak for him. They perpetuate the lies he once perpetuated. So I give you the anatomy of the disinformation. 7 a.m., Donald Trump puts out a statement saying, gee, I hope they didn't plant anything in my property, right, when they came to take my, papers. By 9 a.m., Rand Paul's on Fox talking about, they probably, planted something, or, there may be something suspicious about what the FBI is doing. By 10 a.m., Marjorie Taylor Crazy has picked it up and is out there just directly saying, I believe the FBI planted something in Donald Trump's place. So you begin to see how this narrative, keying off of something that he can't say directly or doesn't want to expose himself to, getting picked up by that ecosystem and perpetuating lies and disinformation that the rest of us now have to basically sit there and go, that's a bunch of bull, that ain't true, et cetera, et cetera. But we're now talking about something else rather than focusing on, as the good counselor here is focused on, he got problems.
Right. No, I think you both lay it out. Michael did it without referencing the preponderance of the evidence standard, and I felt that was fine. Not everyone has to bring that up.
I live with that standard, my friend. I live with that standard.
High standards. Michael has high standards. I think that Michael's reminding us about that echo chamber. Interestingly, there have been more and more calls, though, about put up or shut up on the very serious charge that there is, again, this endless deep state secret conspiracy. This idea that there's something wrong with Monday's search, of course, can be litigated. There's a court process for that. I've mentioned, Asha, in my experience, the subjects of searches often complain, as they are free to do with free speech, but that's not the test. You have to go prove it in court if you can find it. And by the way, as I think viewers know from Law and Order, if not law, if you find that something was illegally obtained in a search, you can't even use it against the person. So great, see if you can prove that. Meanwhile, here's what people are calling for when it comes to Donald Trump's complaints.
Donald Trump can release a warrant. He should release a warrant.
Let's call on President Trump to release the search warrant.
Release the warrant.
Let us have an understanding of why they did this.
I'd love to see the search warrant. I would love to see what they got.
I'd love to see him release that search warrant.
What's to keep Donald Trump and his legal team from releasing the search warrant?
Asha?
I mean, there's nothing. I think what will be more telling is when they give him the inventory of what they took, because that's going to tell you exactly why they were so concerned. I suspect that it will have a list of, not with any specificity, but describing that they had taken classified documents. And I think that's the key here, Ari. The crime is having classified documents on the premises without being authorized to possess them. Donald Trump lost his security clearance the minute that he left office. Biden did not extend a security clearance to him. He may not hold classified information. He may not remove government property. He is a possessor of stolen goods. That's what this case is about. And I think the story isn't the search warrant. The story is really, why did the DOJ spend a year negotiating with him over this? They would not do that with anyone else.
They took a lot of time hoping to resolve it. There's been a lot of crap on in the right-wing response. We're going to cover some of that later. There was this question raised, I saw, by one conservative saying, wait, they called in the FBI for a document dispute. The flip side of that, which we've discussed in the program this week, is, well, it seems like it ended at a point where the Trump folks were just daring the government to say, what are you really going to do? And I think, for good reason, Asha, it's not a first resort thing to conduct this, but it seems like their bluff was called.
That's right. I think they ended up in a game of chicken. That Garland's methodical, deliberate, deferential approach to not engage in a showcase showdown with a former president of the United States did not end well for him, because Trump is a bully. And I think Trump sees that as a sign of weakness. And he basically figured, look, if they wanted, they'll come and get him. And I don't think this guy is going to do it. And they did. And I think the tell here, by the way, a lot of people have mentioned that there was no subpoena issued. You issue a subpoena to someone who is a lawful custodian, or to use another legal term, a bailer of property.
Wow.
You're
on a roll. You're officially on a roll. Go ahead.
Love it. It's like,
but you don't issue a
it's
subpoena
like
to a thief. You go in and get it. And I think that's what he did. And I think this is why Trump is scared, because this is the first time that he's seen the Department of Justice willing to stand up to his dilatory tactics.
You make a very important point, I think, Asha, that what bears underscoring, that mixes the law with the personalities or the aggressive styles here. And that's why I mentioned earlier that legally you have this court-authorized activity, but it is assertive. So some people mention it as a raid to refer to it being assertive. Trump is trying to use that word for different reasons. But look, there are individuals who are very controversial, Mark Meadows, Steve Bannon, who were still viewed, according to the DOJ, as they could negotiate. They went through their lawyers, and they were dealt with in that way, I would say, like adults. Then there were people like Mr. Navarro and, apparently, Mr. Trump on Monday, where the DOJ, with a judge, reached the conclusion, you cannot be trusted. We can no longer even say to you, we'll meet you here to do an arrest or pick up the docs. And those people are treated differently. It's the lowest of the low. Again, in fairness to Mr. Meadows, he was not treated that way because he had back and forth process. Is it a sad day that a former president and Mr. Navarro are at that low point? People in America can make that determination for themselves. I want to thank Asha and Michael for kicking us off here. A lot of interesting stuff.